Hey there everyone, it's Joe. Welcome back to my channel. Now, I've been trying to build this deck for a couple of weeks, and it's the starter deck evolved for Final Fantasy XIII-2, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, I'm struggling. This is not the easiest deck to build straight out of the box, and with, you know, the cheapest method possible in order to get it to work correctly. That's not to say that the deck has no plays at all, but if you're just starting out, this isn't the first deck that I would recommend that you get. If you're really a big fan of Final Fantasy XIII, then I would probably suggest picking up the Opus I Final Fantasy XIII deck instead, for its ability to contain really strong cards like Mog 13 and Rigdia and Jill Nabat, which are all very widely seen even now, 5 sets later. However, I always kind of try to build these decks as best I can, so I've got a deck list here for you if you're really adamant on building this particular deck. Is this going to win tournaments? Probably not. Not gonna lie to you, but it's fun, it's silly, and it's got some really cool plays, so let's just get straight into it. Now, the primary function of this deck, as you can see on the deck list that's just appearing, is to make it so that your opponent has a hard time blocking you with smaller guys that just hinder your opponent in various different ways, whether it be discarding cards, dulling their forwards, making it so the forwards can't block, making it so that it's harder for their stuff to come in. All different ways of hindering your opponent and then sneaking damage in by ways of things like Serah, who is the star of the show. We're just going to quickly run over the fire forwards quickly. We've got Imaginary Brawler and Lan, which are both cards that are primarily there to make it so your opponent finds it harder to block. Lan in particular is very powerful in this deck and is one of the two hero cards in this deck, because he's an old favourite, he's very cool from back in the day, and he can slide under, various different forwards, and you can use all of the other methods that you have in this deck to remove anything that's smaller so that there's nothing stopping him from hitting your opponent. And then rounding it off is a single copy of Noel. Now, Noel is not a card I like, I'm not going to lie to you guys, but if you've bought this starter deck, then you're going to want to run as much of it as possible, and we're running 3 copies of Serah because she is good, and therefore you do have a reason to have a 4-drop 9k guy. The resurrection effect is not great. It's overcosted, but that's why there's only 1 copy in the deck, because if he's in your bin, you're going to be able to grab him back whenever you want to. He's primarily there just to stop your opponent from hitting you, I guess, but honestly, if you could figure out a card that you like more than this one, then you're probably better off putting it in. Quickly going over the ice forwards now, Snow is a great hero card from set 1 that doesn't see as much play now because he, as I said in one of my deck building tips videos, having forwards that don't have come into play effects in this day and age in the game is a little bit slow. And there are quite a lot of those in this deck, like Lan, like Snow, but once you do start to attack, then you do start getting some really good benefits from it. And we're running a lot of Shiva in this deck, so the chances are you're going to proc Snow's secondary effect as well, which is actually very handy. So if you use the Shiva that does damage to destroy something and then you attack with the Snow, you're taking 2 cards out and paving the way for your other guys. So that's the thing. And then all of the other cards in this deck are there to hinder your opponent in some way or another, to allow cards like Snow and Lan to get their damage through while still presenting a presence on the board. Thaumaturge is an amazing card. I mean, there isn't any other discard in this deck, but a 2-drop that provides a body and gets a card out of their hand, it's just crazy value. It's just very good. And then I decided to put in the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance engine in here because I know it's very popular, but it doesn't see a lot of play in competitive play. So I thought, what better place to put it than to show somebody who's getting into the game the various different ways you can control your opponent. So I decided to put Babus, Remedy, and Sid Randall in here because they're very popular characters from a very popular game, which they could do with remaking or putting a sequel to at some point, but that's a video for another day. And they all sort of interact with your opponent in different ways. So Remedy will make it so that it's harder for your opponent to use things like Phoenix, or Devout, or Noel, things like that, whereas Sid Randall and Babus make it just so that their opponent's just a little bit slower. So you need to slow your opponent down in order for you to be able to get the damage through. And then lastly, Serah is the star of the show. She is just a very good card, and I am just looking over at the screen to make sure I don't miss anything on my deck list. She's an EX Burst 5-drop with 7k, which means she's essentially on curve by being a 3k that recovers one of the cards you drop for her, and she has a wide range of things that she can search for. Not going into this deck, but there's like Ice Water or Ice Wind benefits a lot from Serah in many different ways. You could search up the forward Moogle from Opus IV, you could search up Artemisian, you could search up Mog 6. There's lots of little things you can do with Serah that make her really, really powerful. In this deck, however, she interacts with her own Moogle, Mog 13, in this deck very, very well, in that you can dull Mog 13 to give Serah Brave, then attack with her and reactivate the Mog, and then if she gets blocked, you then re-tap the Mog to give her first strike as well. And that just, you know, it's a nice little play. So you essentially have a 3-drop 7k Brave first striker in Ice, which is kind of cool. Now, I didn't put the cards from the first FF13 starter deck in here, including Mog 13 and you know, things like that, because I didn't want to make it so that if you've bought one starter deck you have to buy another, because that's never a nice thing to hear. You can work with this deck, it's just probably not as potent as some of the other ones we've had in the past. Now, all of the backups in this deck have something in common. They are either Moogles, something that searches, or something that stops your opponent from blocking you, save for the one copy of Yule that I've put in here, just because, again, it's a card that comes in the starter deck. She isn't bad. Having extra knowledge of the top card of your deck is useful, and most people don't tend to run Archer very often anymore, and Hecaton Kaya can't target it, so the chance of you actually getting to have to remove the top 10 cards of your deck aren't likely. So Yule's fine. She's not amazing, but she fits in a deck like this that's meant for starting players. And then you have your Mont Blanc, Herdy, and Mog, which make up your Moogles, all of which can be searched for by Serah. Mont Blanc actually does very well in conjunction with Serah if you give her first strike, because dealing damage to your opponent's forward while you're attacking with her means that she kind of has the illusion of being much, much bigger than she is, especially if you do 2,000 damage and then attack with her and you untap everything, and then you have the ability to then do 2,000 damage or even 3,000 damage if you have Herdy, Mont Blanc, and Mog, of all the Moogles to forget. If you have all three of them, you're doing 3,000 damage at a time, and then untapping 3 Moogles every time you attack. That's actually quite a lot of stuff, and even if you have all 3 of them out, having more of them in your hand isn't bad, because you can use them to fuel Serah's Dull effect. And then Herdy is a card that you want to be using in your opponent's turn, rather than yours, so that you can kind of get everything out of the way, so anything up to 3 cost out of the way, so that when your turn comes around you can then start swinging and make the ones that are left, you know, unable to block, and you just sneak all your damage in. And then you have searchers in the form of Mute and Rain, who are both searchers for certain parts of the deck, but they both have the decency to be EX burst searchers, which is very, very strong. And Rain and Lan have a nice interaction as well, which we've covered in many of my videos in the past, particularly in the early days of the game, where if he's blocked by something that's 7k, you can cheekily up his power by 1,000 during combat, so that he's going to destroy whatever he's fighting. And then lastly, we have a single copy of Cannoneer, because again, it just kind of dulls and freezes guys, it stalls them, it serves as a defensive and offensive card in this deck, because it stalls them or it allows you to push for the win. The summons in this deck are all designed to push the game forward for you. Barhammer is going to, you know, get around a lot of your bigger threats, particularly things like Renoa, which could get right in the way of what you're doing. And in conjunction with Mont Blanc, you can actually remove some pretty big threats with that. And then we also have Shiva, and a lot of her. Now, Opus 3 Shiva is just a great card in any ice deck and is well worth picking up from the get-go, just because it's going to dull guys so that you could just go in for the win. And then you have the other Shiva, which is less commonly run but is an equally good card, especially in a deck where you're running Snow, or anything where your opponent has to dull cards, particularly with the FFTCG engine actually, where if your opponent plays a guy and doesn't want to pay the cost, they then run the risk of being killed by a Shiva, which is a very, very cheap kill card if you're running multiple copies of Shiva, which we are. And then lastly, Matthias the Corrupt is just a silly card. Straight up. It's silly. It's certainly a very, very powerful card in Ice, and because your guys are very small, you're still able to attack with them and feign the idea that your opponent can't do it. You could just get rid of them, and then if you're attacking with, say, a Thaumaturge who's tiny, and your opponent's like, why is he doing that? They may hesitate to block for fear of the fact that you're going to Matthias their biggest guy. And if you're making it so that you're picking and choosing what gets blocked, you can play mind games with your opponent so that you are wanting them to block with their biggest guy just so that you can Matthias it. I wanted to put 3 copies of Matthias in here, but honestly, Shiva takes up a lot of space, so you might want to consider running a different card to the damaging Shiva, and maybe run Doom Train if you can get hold of that instead, because that forwards your game plan in many different ways as well. And then you could up your Matthiases to 3, because it's very, very powerful in this deck. And then rounding it out, we have 2 Swamp Monk, mainly as a monster that dodges removal, things like Shantotto or Valofor, that serves as a forward that still pushes your game plan forward. For example, if you have, say, a Snow out and a Swamp Monk out, you're attacking and dulling, potentially freezing 2 guys at the same time, and if you've got a Red Mage or a Ninja out to stop your opponent from blocking you, then you can do that safely as well, at which point you're just sneaking damage in all the time and your opponent will eventually cave. So that's it for this video and this deck list. As I've said at the beginning of the video, I did struggle with this deck quite a lot. I can't say that I hugely recommend buying the FF13-2 deck first if it's your first starter deck. However, that being said, Serah is an exceptionally good card and sees play in many tournament decks. So if you're building up your collection or you're wanting to maybe try something out within, you know, Ice, then picking up Serah's is not a bad shout. It's a very, very good card. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for my FF12 starter deck video, which should hopefully be easier than this one. And I thank you very much for coming to see me. So enjoy your day, and thank you very much again for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Speak to you all later. Bye now.